In this video, I'm going to talk about a subject that was raised by Z Reviews in one of his latest videos called GameFidelity, a guide to gamer audio gear. In this video, he tells you what to look for when trying to buy a new headphone, and he gives you two different audiences, one for the competitive player and then one for the casual player, and distinguishing between the two is the right move here. But he says something for the competitive players that is very much incorrect, and I just want to set the record straight on that one subject. Now, before going any further, I don't want to target Zeos. I actually think he said a lot of really good stuff in this video, and I don't want this to come off as me saying he's wrong, he's wrong, he's wrong. He's just wrong on one subject, and that is the subject of imaging and soundstage. Likely, he either isn't aware of this, or maybe he hasn't personally been in a situation where this has been an important factor. So let me describe a little bit where I'm coming from with this subject. So I am in the competitive side of things. For a long time, I was a competitive CS 1.6 player, of course CSGO as well, and then Overwatch more recently. And after that, I moved away from FPS and moved into RTS, and I'm currently a Grandmaster SC2 player. And then, now I'm kind of going back into COD Blackout. So that's kind of the scope of where I'm coming from. And when I'm talking about competitive, I mean exactly what Zeos talks about, where he says, all we really care about is footsteps. This is in FPS games. But the big contentious issue here that I want to try and address is what Zeos is talking about when he's talking about soundstage. So what he says essentially is, you can watch the video, I'll link it below, but essentially he makes the claim that what you should care about most with imaging and soundstage is the directional imaging that you're going to get. So imagine this as your head. You want to make sure that directionally you're getting every interval this, like, around your head this way, right? Because you want to be able to know precisely where something's coming from. This is totally true. However, he also makes the claim that you want to have a narrow soundstage. You don't want it to be wide. You don't want it to be open. He doesn't really explain the reasoning behind why you would want it to be narrow, or at least not sufficiently. But you really need to have a wide soundstage, because it's not the intervals around your head that are the most important thing when you're playing competitively. What's most important is actually the intervals for distance. So pick the widest point for your headphones. Say like, what you're listening to is like here. And this is the widest that your headphones can hear. If the headphone is a good headphone and it's giving you a wide soundstage, take again like the HD800 or HD800S. You're going to hear precise intervals reliably as things move closer to you from that widest point. Right? That's going to give you a breadth of information, audible information, that's telling you how far away something is. Now, if you have a much narrower, more intimate, kind of like in your head kind of soundstage, the problem becomes you're limited with how different or how distinct those intervals can possibly be, right? So one interval isn't as well distinguished as the next when you're going from the widest point to the closest point, right? Remember, this is like, imagine this is a good situation, and you can pinpoint exactly how far something is away from you. Say they're around a wall and they're coming closer towards you. You can hear them every single step. You have this much room to work with, right? Imagine you have a headphone with a narrower soundstage. If your head stage is here, well, you can only really go like, yeah, you'll hear them at the same point. You'll hear them at the same time that you would hear this one, but you don't actually have the breadth of information to be able to pinpoint 5 meters away versus 10 meters away because they're so close to one another. You actually do really need to have a wide soundstage. The second point I want to bring up is the point that he makes that is true about the importance of the sort of circumaural, like the positional stuff. Most of that isn't actually affected by the headphone itself. Most of the time, if it's a decent headphone, I'm not talking like crazy good or anything. Just take any reasonable headphone over $50, unless it's broken, it's going to represent positional audio reasonably well enough. Where positional audio is affected is usually in the game's code itself. And this can be illustrated if you compare, actually even just the new COD game with the blackout mode. The positional audio there is terrible. It's the worst, one of the worst I've ever heard. It doesn't matter what headphone you had. It doesn't matter if you have the best imaging in a headphone ever. The positional audio in that game is garbage. Compare that to CS 1.6 or CSGO, or even, all the Battlefield games, Overwatch. Those have much better positional audio. What I mean by that is you can tell where someone's coming from. Again, think of footsteps. Where someone's coming from much more accurately with those games because of the game's code, not necessarily just because of the headphones. Your headphones aren't giving you special powers for these examples. What is giving you special powers if you do want to get a high-end headphone is two things. First, it's the soundstage that I talked about. Second is micro detail or microdynamics, right? These are small gradations of volume. And what this means is it allows you to hear the differences in, first of all, it makes those intervals for soundstage much more precise, but it also allows you to pick up on things that much more distinctly or crisply that only happen once or twice. Imagine you're playing a game of Battle Royale in PUBG or something like that, and which, by the way, has much better positional audio than Blackout. You think you hear something, but you think, maybe that's just my mind playing tricks on me. Well, if you have a headphone that's got really good micro detail, you're going to hear that much more distinctly. That micro detail is going to resolve in a way where you can't possibly miss it and question your own sanity, right? You're hearing it and it's accurate. So that is going to make a huge difference. The third thing I want to mention is at some point in this video, Zeos talks about the importance of soundstage and headphones for RTS and competitive RTS. I want to say that absolutely doesn't matter. Most competitive players, even when they're playing in tournaments, will have music playing while they're actually competing. And this is more because it gets them in the rhythm of playing at a certain speed. It relaxes them and calms them down. Makes it so they're not focusing on their nerves as much, and it kind of gets them in the zone. That's so much more important than knowing positionally where something is. There are two examples where it really does matter, and one is if there's something happening outside of the fog of war where you can't actually see it, but you would hear where it would be. But pretty much any headphone is going to tell you the direction, like any reasonable headphone, as long as it isn't a broken headphone or something that just doesn't have any imaging, which is, I don't even know what headphone wouldn't have this. Like most people even use earbuds and it's fine. As long as you know which direction it's coming from, that's going to give you the indicator that you need. And then the second thing is, of course, you have to be able to hear the alerts, right? And again, the only thing that would be somewhat important is micro detail. And even then, if you don't have that good micro detail in RTS, it's fine because you can just turn the music down or turn it off and you'll still hear it, right? A lot of the time, the auditory feedback that you get there is just so strong. And the same thing is true for MOBAs and Dota and all that stuff. You don't really need to hear the game sounds as positionally accurate as you do in FPS games. So let's recap here. The first thing, soundstage. Yes, you need a wide soundstage. Why? Because you want as many distinct intervals as possible between you and the thing that's about to kill you. Second, positional audio, like positional cues, rely much more on the game's code than they do on your headphone. Your headphone needs to have reasonable imaging, but almost all headphones do this. You don't need to have anything special in order to get decent imaging, to have decent positional audio. And when there is a failure of positional audio, that's the result of the game's code being trash and not because your headphones aren't the magic headphone that everybody else is using. So buy a Philips SHP 9500 and then never look at the internet again because you're fine. Or even like a DT770 if you want it closed. Right? That's all you really need, and you're golden. You don't need to spend tons of money to get the craziest imaging thing ever. And then the third thing for FPS still is going to be the importance of micro detail. Right? Micro detail is the thing that is going to be able to make you hear that thing that you thought maybe it wasn't actually real, maybe it was just your mind playing tricks on you, or it was your own footsteps. Having really good micro detail is going to let you hear that and make those kinds of calls a little bit easier. With micro detail, I should also stress that when people talk about blackness of background between notes and music, or really good instrument separation, that's the same kind of thing that you want when you are doing competitive FPS, right? You want to be able to hear those intervals and small gradations of volume, micro detail, as distinctly as possible, so that you're going to get the best cues. Back in like CS 1.6, even CS 1.5, people were buying Sennheiser 650s, HD 650s, because those headphones wasn't because they had the widest of soundstage, but certainly they were open, and that made them wider than most, certainly wider than these, for example. But the reason that people bought them was because they could hear the micro detail, and they can hear them at intervals that give them the best information to be able to react. Whereas if you have something that's a bit muddier, or anything that has a bloated upper bass, anything that bleeds into the different ranges, sound bleeding, that's terrible, right? You don't want that. You want micro detail, you want good sound, a wide sound stage, and then you want to be able to have a headphone that is resolving enough that you can distinguish all those different pieces. I hope this has helped clear that up a little bit. Again, I'm not shitting on Zeos. I think he does an excellent job in what he does and what he brings to the table, and everything else he said is accurate, right? So all that other stuff, it's true. You don't care about bass, and you don't care about the way that things make you feel. You just care about those audio cues that are going to let you have information that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have. All right, and that about does it for this video. Catch you guys next time.